Welcome to the Rosenfeld Review. Lou Rosenfeld here. And four-time guest, I think, Steve. Steve Portigal. That's the Steve I'm talking with today. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Lou.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Steve, one of the reasons you've been on the Rosenfeld Review podcast before is every time we put out a new book, we do one with the author, and you're up to 3 now. You did Interviewing Users. You did, I've still got to say the title.
Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries.
It doesn't always roll off the tongue, but that's the other book Steve did. It's actually quite an excellent read of war stories, which is maybe what we should have called it. But and then Interviewing Users, the second edition, which just came out, what was it, about 2 months ago,
right.
our very first second edition. So we've been talking about that. You may know Steve not only from his written work, but just from the body of knowledge he's been sharing for years and years and years about how to interview users, about user research in general, from his presentations as well. It's just been great to learn from you, Steve, and also to work with you in a different role that's relevant to what we're going to talk about today. So Rosenfeld Media puts on the Advancing Research Conference. The very next one is coming up March 25th through 7th. It's going to be our first in-person conference since the pandemic started. Now, back in early 2020, we put on the first Advancing Research Conference. That was going to be in person, sold out 5 weeks in advance, as you might remember. And then we were just racing to virtualize it in a few weeks, which we managed to pull off. And Steve was one of the curators of the very first 2 of the Advancing Research Conferences. And he is one of the 4 featured speakers closing out Advancing Research 2024. So that's my preamble. That's a lot.
Nice.
That's a lot, Steve. And I other than mangling the book title, I did it all from memory. So kudos to me on a late on a Friday afternoon here in New York. That all said, Steve, what I thought we should talk about today is something you're going to be addressing at your presentation in March, which is broad trends in the field. But before we get into that, I thought it could be really interesting for our listeners to talk about a word that you and I both probably overuse, and that is...
I think you're going to say curation, but it could also be cheese. I'm
Oh
not
my
sure.
goodness! I gave you a softball. The word is dog fooding.
Dog fooding. Well, so cheese was close. Okay.
Well, the ideal food for
Food-related.
dogs is
Yeah.
cheese. That's a known scientific fact. But yeah, so Steve, just in the warm up, we were chatting a little bit about this idea of dog fooding and what happened yesterday that made you think of that.
Right. So yesterday was the first meeting of I guess, of all the folks who are speaking and running workshops at the Advancing Research Conference. Even just saying that, I think that's a unique thing that the conference organizers do. You all is get people together, and there's this whole process that's kicked off yesterday, which is working together to develop those presentations. And I think, if you speak at conferences, the typical process, and I guess it varies, but typically is, what are you going to talk about? Give us a description. Let's do a tech check the day before. I
Maybe.
think, yeah, maybe. Yes, that's true. If you're lucky, there's a tech check. But advancing research, I guess all the Rosenfeld conferences have taken a very unique, and I think it's really paid off, kind of approach, which is, come in with an idea, focus the topic, and we're going to work together. The curators sort of provide leadership and guidance. You have a speaker coach that provides, very specific skill developments, because everyone's at a different level. That lets you bring in, speakers at different levels that have interesting stuff to say. and not sort of show up having baked it, but kind of work to bake it together. Um, and so, yeah, the first couple of conferences, I was one of the curators. I scheduled meetings with these folks and ran discussions with them and gave them feedback and talked about slides and what were the key points. And, I kind of led that side of it. And then I get into this meeting yesterday, and I'm on the other side of it. In fact, before that, I got a Google Doc with all the to-dos and the milestones and the timing, and this is going to be on this will be done on Loom, and this will be done on Dropbox, and this is how this is gonna work, and, I don't know, like, it's, yeah, that initial reaction of like, "Wow, there's a lot here," which I think is double-sided. One is like, "Oh, there's a lot here," but also, "Oh, there's a lot here," because, um, you know so that's the dog fooding, right? Is like experiencing the process from the other
And
side
and
and seeing
Steve,
what it's like.
how did that make you feel?
Is that are you imitating, a user researcher on TV? Um Yeah, I mean, it made me feel good and bad, right? And I like the bad is, oh, this is not what I'm used to. But I think the fact that I went through this process from the other side and I walked into it knowing what it is from this side, from the speaker side, and even then I was still sort of taken aback. I think that like that's one reason why you dog food things, right? Is why
Mhm.
you try it yourself because it's completely illogical for me to be overwhelmed or anything. Like I know this because I did it. And yet, I still had that kind of reaction. So that I think is just like it's interesting or even exciting to be sort of surprised that way. But I think it also feels really good because um, this is a new talk. I don't have the talk written. I have some ideas, and I think, yes, I've done lots of talks that have been new over the course of my career, and, it's always like an uncertain path. You sort of start out and agree to do something, and at some date, you're gonna stand up and share something, uh, but I don't know what it looks like to go from A to Z on this because everyone is just different.
Yeah,
So the fact that there's some structure and support to get there is refreshing. I guess that's the good part of this. Is like, oh yeah, I'm not sort of cast out into the wild. Show up in March and make sure you have some slides for us, Steve. There's a process to get there.
yeah, I mean, we were in the meeting yesterday. We had Robin Beers, who has spoken for us before, say, "Everyone, this is a great process. You're going to love it." And Neil Barry, who's never spoken for us before, who said, "Wow, this is really like we're you know staying true to what the field is about here." And it's great to hear that from both a first timer with us and a veteran. But the idea of dog fooding, I think, is something that really needs to be out there more for people in our field, for everyone, but I can only speak to people in our field, as it were. I spoke in person at a couple conferences in Europe in October and hadn't spoken in person since the pandemic, but it was such an interesting experience to be on the other side and see what a process could be like. And it was really fun, but scary. And speaking at a conference, it is one of these things where the journey is important, but the destination is also pretty damned important. It's not less important than the journey necessarily. So I'm glad you feel that support, um, and I will do our best to help you get there. Um, not too worried about it, Steve. But I was talking with Brenda Sanderson earlier today, and Brenda had just stepped down in the last couple months as the executive director of the Interaction Design Association, which she was doing for about 11 years. And, I told her, I said, wow, I think it's great what you did. You were, just a real gift to our profession. And usually I think the professional association model is broken. And yet, like, this is the exception, was what IXDA has done over this time. But we were just sort of talking about the state of the field broadly. And how it feels to be in it for like 25 years, thereabouts. She and I have both been in at least that long. I think you as well. And you're really talking about 25 years, in this case of user research in particular, at the conference. And if there is one word to describe where you felt things were 25 years ago, what would that be? And I'm going to ask you, what is it now?
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to tip off the second question. The desert.
Beginning was the desert.
Yeah, I mean, it's a biblical reference, I guess.
Yeah.
We were
Forty
if
years.
there were any of us, we were wandering around in the desert.
Hmm.
There was no sort of path or destination or belief that there would be a destination or, um, you know, I guess I don't want to belabor the metaphor too much, but I think the Wild West metaphor gets thrown around, but that sort of says that there's no rules. But this is like there wasn't necessarily a there.
Hmm.
There was there were individuals and small clumps of people, but I mean, we didn't. Yeah, again, if I'm going to really go back to Exodus, there was not a tribe wandering together in the desert. There was sort of a desert and like yeah, disparate pockets of people with no connective tissue, with no idea that they would find and build a tribe.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
And what about now?
I mean, I guess it's the jungle now. I mean, it's dense. It's so dense that you sometimes can't see kind of what's in front of you because it's all right in front of you, so you can't see too far ahead. It's just it's dense and lush, which means there's like lots of stuff, and some of those are sort of predatory factors that are going to creep up on you that you don't necessarily know. But there's bounty and delight and volume and song and like all the sort of the wonder of the jungle is there. And I think just it's the question you're not asking, but for the 25-year folks, like for us oldies, like the survival skills for the desert aren't the same as the survival skills for the jungle. And I guess if you make it 25 years, you learn how to you learn some adaptation from kind of environment to environment. But for better or worse, I think, you know, I mean, maybe this is what you and Brenda talk about is like, hey, remember when we were in the desert? Like there's no, it's not I think it runs the risk of being sort of a nostalgia. Hey, gee, remember when weren't the 80s great? Like that kind of conversation. 25 years ago was not the 80s. Thank you, math people. But that's sort of generational nostalgia. So I think these things all are mixed in, right? It was a certain way. We came up during certain times. We learned to adapt or thrive or overcome, in certain conditions. Those conditions have changed so dramatically,
Hmm.
and we've developed different ways to succeed or different ways to adapt. This is all very hand wavy, not very specific, but
Well,
but we also remember how it used to be, and that informs, I guess, our thinking about how it is now or how it could be going forward.
it feels like, to take your metaphor a little further, the ways you die in the desert are very different than the ways you die in the jungle. And
Yeah,
I think we the risks we had back in the desert was, you know, uh, expiration through loneliness, or there's no water to drink. There's nowhere to go. Whereas maybe in the jungle, we're all getting eaten left and right. It's eat or be eaten. I don't know if
yeah.
that's how you feel about. I might have just beaten that metaphor with a very
Well,
big stick
but
to
I
mix
think
metaphors.
what you're surfacing is what I didn't say explicitly, which is like none of us want to go back to the desert. Like if we're older and reflecting on the past times and sort of what things were like, there may be things about prior eras that brought out certain strengths or certain things, but I don't think we're saying and I'm sort of speaking for you and by extension Brenda and other people. I don't think we're saying, oh, it was so much better than, I think it was not, right. It
Hmm.
was There were certain ways to die there, and it doesn't mean that, okay, everything's perfect now, but the threats and the opportunities and so on are really, really kind of different. But I don't want to forget, but I don't want to go back. And I think that's the mindset that I'm, trying to, I don't know, further as I think about, hey, what are we going to talk about in March?
Well, that's heartening because I hadn't really thought of it that way. That there's danger everywhere all the time, but maybe the dangers from the desert were substantial enough that you don't really want to go back. I mean, I'd certainly like to go back to being 30 years old or whatever I was, but that's a whole nother story. And it did feel like a time of great opportunity. You didn't really have to work too hard to get work, for example. Or I don't know, maybe you did. Maybe that's I'm misremembering. But what I want to know from your perspective is the advice that you have from your own experience to, let's say, someone who's just like in the first few years of their career in user research. Do you feel like what you learned from the desert, not about the desert, but the desert experience, if you will, is it applicable to today for today's researcher?
Some is and some isn't. And I was in a conversation yesterday with someone who was referred to me who is like just out of their bachelor's degree and is interested in the field of user research and is looking for some advice. And those conversations often start by people asking me like how I got started. And
Hmm.
as much as I like to talk about myself, I feel like I mean, the context is so completely different.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe it's interesting to that person to sort of understand some of what we're talking about. The field looked differently. Um, but I mean, I ended the conversation, we kind of got to a point about talking about professional communities and networking. And, I told them about an advancing research community, which this person didn't know about. And even though they're not the target that I think, you or we are trying to serve, it's still a place where people talk about stuff and share knowledge, and you can sort of find other people that have interesting things to say. And I think about networking, connecting with people, and all the tools we have to do that. So I think the way in which you enact that is very different now because we have LinkedIn and Slack and
Hmm.
whatever groups kind of people hang out in and podcasts. And, there's a lot of ways that communities engage and people discuss, and you can sort of find some belonging um, that we didn't have that sort of infrastructure or that critical mass even, in the early era. But I think for me and sort of building my own professional evolution, it looked different technically. Like I got a message on my answering machine one day when I came home. Like it was very different kinds of interactions that were happening that were still the same thing. Like, who do you know? How do we just kind of talk to each other and encourage each other and ask questions? And it is so much more codified, I think, in a wonderful way. Like, you can find a post that says, "Hey, if you're going for your first, user research interview at a corporation, you're going to go through these interviews. You're going to show these things. Here's the document that I made." There's a woman that wrote, like, here's what I wore to my interview. I did an on-site. There's so many more sort of very specific resources and more access to knowledge. Um, but I think it's that same principle about sort of building relationships, building connections, and making yourself part of the community, because so that you don't have that isolation and you can put yourself in the comment field on a LinkedIn
Hmm.
post by me, and and be part of that larger field that way. We have that infrastructure now.
So that infrastructure, you're talking to a large degree about community infrastructure, right? Where
Yes,
people
yes,
meet, where they talk.
yes.
Where do you so you feel that that's a bit improved on what it was? You feel like LinkedIn and Slack are kind of healthy places for researchers to be?
I mean, right, I think being in a community and using these corporate tools, there's a lot to complain about social media and so on, but, again, it's the desert and the jungle, right? I mean, you know, there was a time when I knew no one, or there was only a handful of user researchers and that were sort of known, and to find them was, like, a lot of effort, or to be in touch with them was a lot of effort. I started an email list in, like, I don't know, 97 or something like that. It was not great, but it was sort of a bridging technology to a future era where there was just more community. Um, yeah, now I've just lost track of my
No,
thread
that's all right.
altogether.
But it's interesting because some might argue that communities are weaker now, or they're more, I don't know, teased apart, not teased apart, but fragmented.
Mm,
Um, there's more churn, there's more
yeah,
uncertainty, and yet maybe that's okay. Maybe that's part of what keeps communities fresh, is that
right. I
they're
mean,
kind of disrupted a lot.
you and I are we're sort of forcing a binary of, like, the desert and the jungle, like 25 years ago and
Hmm.
2024. But I think as you start to look at things like what you're bringing up, yeah, we have ebbed and flowed and wandered around these kind of twisted paths between these different eras. And sure, there's probably a point where there was like one email list and one local meetup, and quote unquote, everyone went to those things. And you could kind of see the people or hear from them. Um, but and so that doesn't exist, right? Like there would be a time in the Bay Area where I live, there'd be a meetup, and like I could tell you there are four people I would see at anything, and I would just always see them. And the pandemic certainly sort of messed up our in-person, local, kind of casual,
Hmm.
sort of the social aspect of community building. So there is churn and uncertainty and sort of frustration with the limitations of the sort of the community infrastructure. Um, and yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel like, oh, I want to ask a question and I don't have a place anymore to do that feels safe or where I'm going to get a good answer.
Well, it's
So I don't
also
I don't think it's perfect now by any means.
no, I mean, and it's interesting in some ways. It's analogous to mass media. We grew up with, whatever, six channels of TV, and everyone watched the same shows, and that doesn't happen anymore, obviously. But let's actually, that's a good segue talking about things like COVID to jump back to the evolution over the last 25 years. And I wonder, I mean, COVID's the obvious one, but are there other points where you feel things pivoted during those 25 years?
Yeah, I don't know what the structure will be like, but I sort of imagined like a timeline and trying to think about some key inflection points along that. Um, and there's probably a handful. I don't know how sort of important all of them are, but I think the one that, um, and certainly for me, this has been really significant. I think was sort of the decline of the agency and consultants and the growth of insourcing.
Hmm.
Um, and so, you started to see so for people that don't know, back in the olden times, like UX work overall and user research, of course, was done by agencies. Companies didn't hire for this. They didn't know how to hire for it. All the great work was done by these great agencies. And the business model has changed. I don't know if this is true, but there was a point at which Apple brought advertising in-house that I think upset advertising as an industry. And I don't know if that was sort of the major inflection point, and everything we're talking about followed that. I don't know. Somebody else does. So
Well, I mean,
uh,
there were in the field, there were certainly acqui-hires. I mean,
that's what we saw, right? Agencies got bought to get the staff. Those agencies went away, right? Facebook bought Bolt Peters.
and
Um,
well, also Hot Studio, not a research company, obviously, but yeah, in that
yeah,
same vein.
right. That's true. Right. Um, right.
Adaptive
Salesforce
Path.
bought a company. Adaptive Path is probably sort of the more famous one among our cohort. and there's dozens, right? I think there was a chart for a while. You could see, who got bought by who.
Right.
And so while that's happening, those big companies are not hiring agencies, are not to the same level. So, where the jobs are now in-house. And so that changes. I mean, so that means I'm still a consultant through these whole 25 plus years. That's changed what opportunities are available to me. It's created new ones, and it's, eliminated others. And, so the mix has changed. And so I guess, there's a personal aspect for me. But I think what's interesting is when the work is done by people that work at the company versus when the work is done by people who are consultants. And I think for research, it's super interesting because there's a truth to power role that we play. And if
Hmm.
you're the VP of user research, it's not, this is not a binary. It's not better or worse. Just think about what I can and can't say, and what access I have and don't have, and what insight and history and context I do and don't have. That, my client, let's say, who's, yeah, is the VP of user research and insight for, a large company. They can say all kinds of things that I can't say, and I can say all kinds of things that they can't
And
say.
see
And
things too.
yes, I guess it's not just the say, right? It's the understanding, and that, um, they have their job to worry about, but they also have a long time to make change, and they know who all the people are, and they know who to have lunch with, and who to invite to a meeting, and who to, all the tools that they can kind of work with. And so the performance of this work, I think, is different because it's not just about doing an interview or doing a study, right? It's about driving change, changing what people believe and how they think, and getting them to act on that. And so I don't know, like I like the partnership. I like working with those in-house folks because they can do things that are just amazing, but I can bring things to them that no one in their organization can do. So I think it doesn't mean the death of possibilities. It just means that the flavor of it has really kind of changed. And yeah, so I don't know. That's an inflection point to me, was sort of the insourcing, the growth of in-house teams, and the growth of leadership as a part of that.
Hmm.
Has really changed the who's doing research.
Well, then there's the whole, I don't know if you see this as one of those pivot points or inflection points, but the whole powder phenomenon of, democratization, people who do research rather than, people who identify as researchers. I don't know if that's something that's high on your list, or if there are other points that you think were really important over the evolution of user research in the last 25 years.
I was like noodling in a document today, and I wrote down, uh, what is research and who does research, and I was thinking of those more as just like, um, I don't know if there's inflection points tied to that.
Hmm. Fair
Maybe. Well,
enough.
actually, in fact, I wrote down when Kate Towsey coined that term, as being an inflection point. So yeah, I actually think there is when there was enough of a change that someone could point to it and give it a name,
Hmm.
I think was an inflection point. So yes, you're right. I take back, but I think it speaks to these sort of perennial questions where, and I think it's around what is this thing that we're talking about? Because research means a lot of different things, and we have one word that is the umbrella term for all this stuff. And included in all that, included in all that is, well, who's performing these what are the activities that we're talking about, and who's performing them? And so when you have to keep qualifying it and saying, well, there's research, but there's research done by researchers. Well, there's qualitative done by researchers. And then there's, a different aspect, but we won't give it a label because we don't want to be pejorative, of research that's done by people who do research, which is a great term, right? I mean, when Kate, identified that, it is just really brilliant. And yet, how awful that we have to talk about this activity using this. It almost sounds apologetic. Like, and again, I really think I'm not. I want to be positive about that term, but I think if you just step way, way back and say, like, if we go to somebody in another field and say, like, yeah, the tasks in our field are performed by researchers and people who do research. Like, it sounds like participation trophy language. Like,
Yeah.
it's a response to something that I think is much more complex, that I don't know that I'm going to fully tease out myself. But I want to work to point to so that we can, yeah, think about what's ahead.
And it's a real thing, and it has real implications. I mean, certainly tooling does. We'll see what AI does. Um, I'm gonna throw out one more idea, and then we're gonna have to bring it home. We actually didn't even take our normal mid-roll break. This has been such a great conversation. We've just let it go. Not surprising because we've got experience having these podcasts together, Steve. So uh, no surprise at how much fun it has been to talk. But one of the things that uh, I've heard you say, you may not remember this, but when you wrote the first edition of Interviewing Users, when that came out over 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago now, you told me it's really great to write this stuff down and move on. You don't have to answer the same questions over and over again. You can point people to the book, which a lot of people certainly have picked up on. It's been it's a classic in the field. Let's face it. And yes, we're not biased at all. But you wrote it down and you moved on, and I think that's an important. I don't know if it's a trend or maybe it's more of a characteristic that I think any of us who've had any time in this field need to consider that you didn't just grab on to the same thing you'd been doing 25 years ago and assume you're going to ride that out for the rest of your life in the same ways. Now, I just made it sound really negative, and I didn't now that I said it that way, I don't really mean it that way. I mean, there are people for various reasons who economic reasons or the way they're wired, who knows what, they don't like change. But I just don't know how you stay in this particular field for very long if that's the case. Would you agree with that, or you want to push back?
I mean, this is a great conversation because everything we're talking about has not just nuance, but it has there's pros and cons. It's like definitely a theme that I'm hearing in what we're talking about. So yeah, I think when you stick around, there's a part of me that does want to hold on to stuff and just like, why can't I be doing the same work I was doing, 15 years ago? Like sort of, I knew how to do it. You said before, like, oh, it seemed easy to get work, and maybe that's true, or maybe it's not, but there's that perception. Things change and it forces you to evaluate what you know, what you're good at, where you can bring value. That obviously is good for us as people. This is creative work, and we're creative people, and being able to be creative around, yeah, how to provide value and how to find joy in the work that we do. I think the fact that that isn't static is probably good for us, but it's frustrating. It is frustrating. So it's cool to move on. It's cool to come back to something you wrote 10 years ago
Mhm.
and like get another bite at the apple on that. And like it was that actually was like one of the most exciting kind of creative prospects to undertake, because in my mind I had set it to bed, and you and I talked a couple of years ago about doing another edition, and I'm like, nah, why would I do that? Like, not why does the world need that, and why do I need to go through that? But coming back and sort of not moving on, or doing the next sort of stage of that moving on. I mean, I think the thing is, like, the world changes with or without us,
Mhm.
right? And so, I think we're sort of obligated to not, I guess, not obligated. We have the opportunity to progress and move. And I think that just it comes back to the community thing, right? I think if you're wandering by yourself in the desert, you have less access to people to be inspired by, to emulate, or to position against. You definitely see people in your community that do things you're like, oh, I do not want to do that. I do not want to be perceived that way or engage in that. Um, there's people that are really, really leaning into AI. They're trying this stuff, they're seeing what works, they're experimenting, they have points of view about it. And I'm kind of sticking my thumbs in my ears on it a little bit, and not Like there's other
Yeah,
people
don't
that are going
worry,
to be the
Steve.
expert on that.
We're going to cover a lot of that at Advancing Research, March 25th through 27th in New York City. Um, couldn't resist. But we are about out of time. But it's been a great conversation. I know you brought a gift, but before we wrap it, we get to your gift, I do want to again mention that Steve will be the closing speaker, closing invited featured speaker at Advancing Research. He'll be speaking at the end of the day on March 26th in New York City. We're going to be at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, New York. It's a really fun part of New York City. A lot of you haven't been there, I'll bet. If you've been to New York, you probably didn't make it to Queens as a visitor. You should. Queens is the new Brooklyn, after all. And the venue is really wonderful, especially if you're interested in anything involving film or TV. We'll have the run of the museum. But the program is really why you should come. And Steve's a big part of it. Looking forward to it, Steve. Steve Portigal, author of 3 Rosenfeld media books, both editions of Interviewing Users, as well as Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. Steve, and I should say, if you want to know more about Steve, you can go to his website, portigal.com. That's Portigal, Portigal, not Portugal.com. Steve, what gift did you bring for our listeners today?
Yeah, people that follow food, which is a weird phrase to say. People might know Jay Kenji Lopez Alt, who does Instagrams, all kinds of stuff, and YouTube's all kinds of stuff. He's just like a very generous and creative food writer and sort of storyteller. But he has this book called The Walk, which is maybe I don't know. I've tried buying cookbooks. I'm not
Walk, like WOK?
Right. I guess it would
Walk the
depend what
walk?
region. Yes. What region of North America are we from? The Walk. Yes, WOK. It's like, yeah, for someone that's like a reasonable cook, you can like every recipe in there that I've tried is amazing and comes out, like what you would get in a restaurant. And so to be a white person kind of cooking with what I can get at the grocery store and be able to make something that actually resembles what it is that I'm trying to get to. It's a really great book. And
What's one really great recipe you've made?
I can't remember what the actual thing was. He has this whole thing about velveting the meat. You just beat the crap out of it with your hands. You squish it and put it in baking soda. And so we had company over and we made a stir-fried beef. It was like a very specific kind of stir-fried beef. And like the people were just like raving, as dinner guests should do, about this beef is so soft. I'm like, yeah, because I squished it in a colander for 60 seconds with baking soda. Like it's, a thing you wouldn't think to do, or you might think like, yeah, I'll skip that step. But it's really, it's a recipe book. It gives you the steps to produce something really incredible. So
Well,
I mean,
the hell
him,
with this
I'll recommend.
podcast. I'm going to go eat. You're making
Yeah,
me hungry. So,
good.
Steve, thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in March in New York, and especially to your presentation. And thanks for joining us today on the Rosenfeld Review.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.